as part of this getting involved with the military on building different avionics, I had developed something called the Gallium Arsenide gun device. And this was a device that would replace a vacuum tube, which was called a klystron. And jets currently at that time were using these klystron radars. A klystron is the device that would produce the radar frequency. And the klystron required 300 or 400 watts of power to run it, and the thing weighed 50 pounds. And of course, on an aircraft, they measure the performance of the aircraft in terms of ounces and milliwatts. And with my gun device, which only required 50 microwatts and weighed less than an ounce, we suddenly were able to replace all of the conventional radars in jet airplanes with our little semiconductor gallium arsenide device. I was never allowed to patent anything on the gallium arsenide device because the work was classified at the time. So I have never got any recognition except internally for that invention. However, along about the same time, the FAA, the Federal Avionics Association, wanted to build a new radar. And Texas Instruments had built all of the radars. The ASR stood for Air Traffic Surveillance Radar. They wanted to build the ASR 8. We'd built ASR 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. But Nixon was in the White House at the time, and Nixon, of course, had a ranch near, what was the town in near Los Angeles in California? San Clemente, thank you. And so suddenly this company, which was located out at San Clemente, decided to work with, I think it was Philips in France, and they won the contract for the air traffic surveillance ASR 8. And we were pretty disappointed because, of course, we had the technology, we had the gallium arsenide devices, we knew exactly how we were going to build this radar. And then we were told, sorry, the contract was won by Philips, and I've forgotten the other company. I think it was, might have been Northrop, but I'm not sure. I have to go check my notebooks. But obviously this was a political deal. But Texas Instruments management decided we're going to go ahead and build it anyway, because we know we can run rings around this company, and we'll be there first. So we had a crash program, 6 7-day weeks, 14-hour days, and we built the ASR 8, which met all of the specs that the FAA wanted. And we demonstrated it to the FAA, and they accepted it, and they removed the other people from the contract. So it was a big, big deal. And I shared 2 of the patents on the receiver for the FAA, and what it would do, the really wonderful thing, because of this frequency agility stuff, it could detect a Piper Cub out at 30 miles away at the same time that a 747 is landing at the end of the runway. So you have these huge signals mixed in with this little tiny signal coming from 30 miles away. So the dynamic range of this radar was truly impressive. One other interesting thing about that too, which was again a lesson for me, is that the FAA, being a government organization, had about a 50-page document of the specs for this system, and it included things like the paint had to have a certain intensity of color, it had to be color number 7, and the labels on the machine had to be within 3/4 of an inch of this, and all this detail. And all that was okay. I mean, okay, it's just we have to follow all these rules. But one of the rules we didn't like was that the radar had to be turned on from a cold start or a hot start, because the idea was this radar could be out in the Sahara Desert where the temperature might be, 120 degrees Fahrenheit, or it might be in Alaska where the temperature might be 30 degrees below zero, and you had to have it come on and completely working within 5 minutes. So in order to do that, we had to cost out all of these thermoelectric coolers and heaters to keep the system ready to turn on from a cold start. And then we found out after we met all of those specs, which did cost the FAA another few $100,000 per radar to do that. They put it in a building where the temperature is 72 degrees plus or minus a degree for the next 30 years. But it was a wonderful invention, and these radars are installed all across the country in international airports all over the world. That particular ASR-8. I think they're on the ASR-9 now, but anyway, that was a really exciting project. The patent was on the gallium arsenide receiver. A Russian scientist named Landau actually invented this back in 1920. Truman, this is not for you to decide. You write it up, and we'll have our lawyers come take a look at it. And the lawyers came and said, this is fine. I said, but Landau invented this in 1920. I mean, we've got gallium arsenide technology, and we've got these other features, but the whole idea, local oscillator, it's called the local oscillator. This is the device which detects the signal coming back and processes it. And Landau had this idea for a local oscillator back in 1920 and wrote it up in his physics books, and we were teaching them in school and so on. But that didn't deter our patent lawyers. And the next thing I knew, we had these patents, and I'm getting these nice, shiny dollar bills for each one of these patents. And I actually decided to read the patent because they had taken all of my verbiage and completely put it into legalese. And one of the things that I own a patent on, or owned a patent on at that time, because I'm sure this thing is expired by now, was something called a threadedly received member. And I kept looking, what threadedly received? What are they talking about? And then I realized they were talking about the 832 screw. This is just something you buy at the hardware store. It has a gauge of 8 and the 32 threads per inch. We called it the 832 screw, and we coated it with gold, and we used that to tune up the oscillator to just the right frequency. But anyway, I own a patent on the 832 screw, but it's called the threadedly received member. I really didn't know what to think of the lawyers at TI, but we patented one thing after another. When at first I arrived at Texas Instruments, I was issued a notebook and told whatever I did, at the end of the day, I had to have somebody witness it. And when the notebook was filled, I handed it over to the patent office, and they would go copy. They would go, I forgot what we called it. There was no Xerox in those days. Photocopy it. And then they would give it back to me if I really wanted it. Well, of course, I really wanted everything I'd done, except they wouldn't let me take the notebooks with me when I left TI. I had about, 50 notebooks with all the pages filled out and all the stuff we did every day, and it was a lot of fun, but had to be in pen.